guys, welcome and welcome back. 'Tis the season to be busy, am I right? I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I've been trying to get some new content out as soon as possible. However, what I've been diving into isn't, in my opinion, something to deliver halfway or rushed, so I do appreciate your patience. As part of the research for Part 5, I've been working my way through completing the synopsis of the book, Hold Me Tight, which those of you familiar or close to the case know that this is the book Shanann bought for her and Chris to read. If you're new here or new to the case, I encourage you to take a few moments and watch the other videos to gain a more well-rounded understanding of why I'm covering this book on my channel. Picking up where we left off in Part 2, this chapter section is titled, Where Did Our Love Go? In this section of the book, the author mentions a couple that she's spent months counseling. Ironically, the husband's name is Chris. This specific couple has an issue of the husband expressing a need for the kids to be more disciplined while the mother seems to have little to no boundaries when it comes to the kids. This reminded me more of the Nutgate issue and the notion that Cindy's approach to teaching Cece about not always getting her way was not well received. Forgive the baby. This leads into the deeper issue. You know that song and dance that happens when conflict arises and one person just suddenly wants to pretend like all is well, or someone says, just forget it, or as Shanann said, she's never coming here again. Nothing gets resolved, and one, if not both parties, turn away feeling unimportant or inadequate. Let me pause real quick and give this obligatory disclaimer. This is a discussion channel, and the comments and opinions expressed in this video are my own. My observations, conclusions are based on reading, research, and facts released about the case, or even personal accounts that I have experienced in my own life. Please refrain from emotionally charged comments, and please state when you're giving your opinion, or provide the source if you find out some information that you're wanting to share. There are a lot of channels that have covered this case for years, merely for discussion, and this channel dives deeper than others with regards to the public awareness of domestic issues. So please be kind in the comments. We discuss sensitive topics and sometimes unpopular opinions. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we think happened in this case. However, it is important to keep our minds open and discuss the possibilities. This channel is not like the others where it's all opinions and theories strictly about the case. This was a case where so many said they never saw it coming, and yet there were red flags all within both families. It's my hope to raise awareness of these issues so that in the event someone is watching and dealing with similar issues, then hopefully it will highlight the areas that someone needs help. Not all cases with these types of issues end in murder or divorce. Whether you are the one with the issues or it's a spouse or family member, if you're able to view them from an objective standpoint and seek counseling or help, then it's my hope that the relationship can grow and become a healthy one. So please don't come here with the bashing or polarized comments, etc. This is a safe space. The truth is there is a lot to discuss within this case, and there is more than enough evidence to back even some of the seemingly ludicrous theories. If Shanann and Chris were in a healthy state of relationship, then these murders would have never happened. Shanann never had an opportunity to use her own voice once she discovered the end was near. We merely see the text messages between her and friends. If one person is saved by simply being more aware, it's worth every hour that I pour into this channel's content, and her death will continue to shine a light of encouragement to others. No matter what your personal thoughts are about her family, or the Watts, or Chris, take a moment and just make sure that your comments remain respectful, keeping in mind that we are discussing human life, behaviors, and emotions. Now, back to the book. Dr. Sue mentions that underneath all the distress, partners are asking, "Can I count on you?" depend on you? Are you there for me? Will you respond to me when I'm in need? Am I valued and accepted by you? According to Dr. Sue, the anger, criticism, and demands are actually cries from one partner to draw back in their loved one and reestablish a safe connection. Think about that the next time you and your spouse seem a bit nippy with each other. What's the root of their behavior? It sounds a bit parental, doesn't it? Almost like a temper tantrum? Then again, isn't that essentially what it is? You mentioned you want to snuggle with your husband who just finished up an evening of work duties before lying down. And his response is, can't I just do what I want for a little bit without being asked to do something else? Seems selfish, but where you look at one, you must look at the other's response as well. It's human nature not to like being told no or not right now. But even as adults, when we have a moment of selfishness, it can come across more harshly than anticipated. Depending on how you read or play that out in your mind, both of them mimic the kid in the store who mumbles or pouts when he doesn't get to go to the toy section first because he wanted to go look at toys first. Do you love your kids any less when they act like that? Now what about your spouse? Sure, it's frustrating to feel like you're parenting an adult or being parented by an adult, but is this behavior a simple emotional communication response to a need that's unmet? How, as a spouse, can you prevent or sidestep the usual argument or spat by recognizing it and responding differently? Just something to think about. The example I gave is somewhat of a simple one, but I think you get the picture. Sure, some people are just jerks and choose to be that way. Selfishness, there's no room for that in a marriage, but more often than not, the human you love is hurt, broken, scared, has a need that's being unmet, or all of the above. Dr. Sue then goes into describing this further by explaining what she has termed primal panic. In short, it's what we are taught by the attachment theory, where a loved one is our shelter in life, and therefore, when that person is emotionally unavailable or unresponsible, these emotions emerge. I will say, without reading this entire section of the book, which, by the way, this is actually a pretty good section, and it is very interesting, that it is a very valid observation. The more these interactions occur where neither partner feels safe, both become defensive, and each eventually begins to assume the worst about their partner. Reconnecting emotionally is the key when two are on completely different pages. This is where the underlying struggle lies. Something else that was interesting that I read that seems to resonate in this case, that it's common for couples at this point in their relationship to be more demanding and focus less on the natural longing to be emotionally close with that of physical needs. So let me just kind of reiterate that or explain that a little bit differently. Basically, this becomes the time where in a relationship, one or both may not focus so much on the emotional connection, but they deem the physical, because there is physical intimacy, that technically they're still connected. And this really came to light, and it comes back to what we learned or what we read in the text with Shanann and her friends. So essentially, it's a distraction and a temporary high or fix. It's the most common is being sex. So again, just explaining a little bit more clearly what that means. Think about it in the context of a marriage and the intoxication of an affair. Dr. Sue labels it as disguised and distorted message that keeps someone from being exposed and makes it more difficult for partners to respond. This makes so much sense if you think of it in the context of any relationship, dating, marriage, affair, even certain friend groups. That moment when you're pondering if you're ready to commit to the next level or if you should break up. This is usually not a good time when you should be physically intimate, as it can offer ominous cloud of confusion. Takes me back to the text between Shanann and her friends, where she mentions they were having so much sex prior to her leaving, and they even did it in the pantry. Was this a ploy to appease Shanann until Chris could be free for the weekend, or was this a distorted approach to reconnect physically, although their connection emotionally wasn't there? We see this again when Shanann states, "I'm sure sex is sex." Then Chris rejects her. It makes me question who was the emotionally unattached one in this marriage at this time. Like, have you ever dated someone who was just so nice, yet there just wasn't a spark? What about dating someone shorter or taller than you, and you try to force yourself to believe that it really doesn't matter? But it does. Have you ever been there? No judging here. Marriages and relationships have their ebbs and flows, but was this an ebb that spiraled out of control? To think you view sex as just sex, and that's at least one way to connect. It begs the question, just how long had their marriage been like this? Then take into account each baby after Bella. Once the lull occurred, then the sex amped up to replace the void. And as mentioned in a previous video, along comes another delighted distraction, the baby. This worked for them for years, until one day it didn't. Insert Kessinger. The spiral and detachment led to the purchase of this book, in my opinion. She was seeking to find some sort of restoration in her marriage to salvage the life they had built. It's clear it was built on sinking sand, and it wouldn't be long before the waves of debt and deception would wipe out their life as they knew it. Dr. Sue goes on to explain that the most dominant trio of the demon dialogues is that of the protest polka. She does explain this in great detail, and it is interesting. She explains that this is a cycle of one partner becoming critical and aggressive, and the other is defensive and distant. Couples who find themselves in this scenario within the first few years of marriage have an 80% chance of divorce. 80. Sometimes a vigilant partner can spot these dialogues when they begin to form, but the majority aren't even aware of the pattern. This is or was a very interesting part of the book. It's certainly worth reading, not even just for relationships, but even friendships. There's a quote by Ted Hudson from the University of Texas. Says, "When marriages fail, it is not increasing conflict that is the cause. It is decreasing affection and emotional responsiveness." This next part stood out to me, more so reflectively with this case, and because we see in her text between friends that she was growing more and more emotional and concerned as the time went on. Dr. Seuss states, "We are never more emotional than we are when our primary love relationship is threatened." I've always felt that Shanann had some idea or knowledge of Kessinger. I personally do not believe that Chris had not already been caught with Kessinger back in March of 2018. Google searches, the Anadarko employee sees them at the water fountain, Shanann speaks to a divorce attorney, all in March. Up until that point, there wasn't any issue, quote-unquote issue, so big that it warranted a divorce. At least not that we have seen. There were never any additional posts or areas of concern besides in-laws or laws that would have resulted in such a tragedy. Shanann's letter she left to Chris was her Hail Mary. It was the olive branch to move forward upon her arrival home. This is the part where I ask you to clear your head of the financial aspect of this. Pay attention to her emotions, her words. I think it's safe to say that, in my opinion, Shanann felt threatened and at a loss for her marriage, and sadly, Chris and Shanann never defined the common enemy. I believe hers and his common enemies was both finances and Kessinger.
Of August?
July. I don't know if it was the 14th or the 15th. One of those 2 days. But we had went out and we stopped there just real quick on the way back. And we were there not very long. But that time I saw a picture of his wife and one of his kids. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, she's so beautiful. And I took a step back and I was just like, this man has a gorgeous house. He has beautiful babies. He has a beautiful wife. He has an awesome job. Why would he want to leave this? And I remember talking to him about it, and that was the first time that I tried to actually say, what do you think about not separating from your wife? What if you really try to work on this? And he had expressed to me that we've tried to work on this, and it's not working, so that is why we're separating. And I spent some time, because it almost made me feel bad, where I was like...
It got her to a point where she felt bad, but clearly it wasn't bad enough, as we have seen in text messages during that time period. We will look further into this interview and what has stood out to me most. Additionally, we will dive deep into the digital information from Chris's phone. Their stories continue to be proven false, and for what reason? It's the little things, and it all takes me back to part 2 and now what we will be discussing in Hidden Motives part 5. Was this a planned out crime that both parties had considered, yet only one jumped at the opportunity to carry it out? Will this explain different reactions and responses? Will it put to rest some of the speculations on both families? Will this spotlight land on others or right back on the two that it's never left? Join me as we reset and take a look at this case from an entirely different lens and focus on a very real possibility. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the full premiere of Hidden Motives Part 5, When Civil Turns Criminal.